What happens when critics sit in quiet theaters, but the people who lived it sit in silence afterward? Some war movies were torn apart on release, labeled messy, loud, or uncomfortable. Yet veterans watched those same films and nodded because they recognized something critics missed. Not Polish, not poetry, but truth, the kind that feels uneven, the kind that doesn't explain itself. And once you notice that gap, you start seeing these films very differently. Stay with me, because by the end of this list, one title changes how you judge realism forever. Number 12, Kajaki, 2014. This movie barely raises its voice, and that's exactly why it works. When Kajaki arrived, critics largely ignored it. No famous faces, no sweeping speeches, no cinematic gloss. Many reviews called it slow, minimal, even uneventful, but veterans responded in the opposite way because Kajaki understands something most war films forget. Real danger doesn't announce itself, it waits. The story follows a small unit stationed in a remote outpost, where a single mistake turns into a long, grinding fight against fear, terrain, and time. What stands out is restraint. The film refuses to rush. Every pause matters. Every decision feels heavy. Veterans have praised how accurately it captures the mental spiral, the waiting, the second-guessing, the quiet moments where courage is tested without applause. There is no dramatic score pushing emotions. The soundscape is wind, breathing, distant movement. That realism unsettled critics who expected momentum. But veterans recognize the truth. This is what pressure feels like when there is nowhere to hide and no fast exit. Kajaki doesn't glorify anything. It observes. It lets discomfort linger. And that honesty is exactly why those who've been there often describe it as one of the most accurate depictions of modern conflict ever filmed. Not because of action, but because of patience. Number 11, Bat-21, 1988. Isolation is the real enemy here, and the film never lets you forget it. Bat-21 confused critics when it premiered. Some found it repetitive, others called it too restrained. Where was the spectacle? Where was the momentum? But veterans understood the focus immediately. Survival is not exciting, it is exhausting. The film centers on a downed officer trapped behind enemy lines, communicating with a distant guide who cannot physically reach him. That structure bothered reviewers expecting constant movement, but veterans connected deeply with the psychological realism, the boredom, the fear, the constant scanning of surroundings, the sense that every step might be the wrong one. What makes Bat-21 resonate is its refusal to inflate the situation. There are no grand victories here, just endurance, just problem-solving under pressure. Veterans often point out how accurately the film captures the mental toll of being alone, dependent on voices over a radio, trusting someone you cannot see. The environment becomes a character. Heat, silence, distance. These elements wear the protagonist down slowly, the way real situations do. Critics wanted variety. Veterans recognized truth. Bat-21 isn't flashy. It's honest. And for those who know what isolation really feels like, that honesty matters more than anything else. Number 10, Hamburger Hill, 1987. This film refuses to make the struggle look meaningful, and that upset a lot of people. When Hamburger Hill was released, critics were harsh, too bleak, too repetitive, too hopeless. Why show the same hill again and again? Veterans answered that question without hesitation, because that's exactly how it felt. The movie focuses on a single objective that demands constant effort with little visible progress. No sweeping strategy discussions, no inspirational speeches, just exhaustion, confusion, and loss. Veterans of that era have consistently praised the film for showing how morale erodes when purpose becomes unclear. Hamburger Hill doesn't frame hardship as noble. It frames it as draining. Conversations feel raw. Humor is defensive, not charming. Bonds form because there is no alternative. Critics wanted narrative payoff. Veterans recognized emotional accuracy. What makes the film powerful is its refusal to editorialize. It doesn't explain why things happen. It just shows that they do. And that lack of commentary mirrors the experience many veterans describe. Orders come. You follow. Meaning arrives later, if at all. Hamburger Hill isn't comfortable. It's not designed to be. And that discomfort is precisely why it still earns respect where glossy portrayals do not. Number 9, Rules of Engagement, 2000. This movie asks a question critics didn't want to sit with. Rules of Engagement was criticized heavily on release, accused of being simplistic. accused of leaning too hard in one direction, but veterans responded to something deeper, the moral pressure of split-second decisions that cannot be undone. The film moves between intense moments on the ground and a courtroom where those moments are dissected by people who were not there. Veterans have often pointed out how accurate that contrast feels. One environment demands instinct, the other demands explanation, and those two worlds rarely align. Critics focused on messaging, veterans focused on process, how confusion builds, how rules feel clear on paper but blur under stress, how accountability can arrive long after context is lost. Rules of Engagement doesn't offer easy answers. It shows how decisions made in seconds can be judged for years. That tension resonated strongly with service members who recognized the imbalance between experience and evaluation. The film may stumble in tone at times, but its core conflict feels painfully familiar. And that familiarity is why veterans continue to defend it, even when critics remain uncomfortable. Number 8. The Thin Red Line, 1998. This film doesn't sound like a war movie, and that's why it divided everyone. Critics argued over the thin red line endlessly. Some called it beautiful, others called it indulgent, too quiet, too philosophical. Veterans, however, often connected deeply with its internal focus, because real conflict includes long stretches of thought, doubt, and waiting. The film drifts between perspectives, showing how the same moment feels different to each person experiencing it. Veterans have praised this approach for capturing the mental fragmentation that happens under pressure. Not everyone reacts the same way, and the film respects that. Action arrives suddenly and disappears just as fast. What lingers are memories, fears, and unanswered questions. Critics wanted structure. Veterans recognized realism. The Thin Red Line understands that conflict isn't constant noise. It's anticipation. It's reflection. It's moments of beauty colliding with moments of fear. That contrast unsettled audiences expecting traditional pacing. This is a film that trusts the viewer to sit with discomfort. Veterans did, and many found themselves reflected in its quiet honesty. Number 7, 12 Strong, 2018. This movie was dismissed as familiar. Veterans saw something else entirely. When 12 Strong hit screens, critics brushed it off as formula-driven. Another modern war story, another group of determined figures moving through difficult terrain. But that surface reaction missed what veterans immediately noticed. This film captures the uncertainty of early missions where plans were thin and outcomes were far from guaranteed. Set during the earliest phase of a new conflict, the story focuses on a small team adapting to unfamiliar conditions with limited support. Veterans have praised the film for showing how much improvisation mattered in those first months. Communication was fragile. Trust had to be built quickly. Nothing felt stable. Critics focused on structure. Veterans focused on atmosphere. The sense that everyone involved is figuring things out in real time. There is no confidence baked into the narrative, only movement forward because stopping is not an option. The film also avoids turning its characters into symbols. They argue, they doubt, they reassess constantly. Veterans often point out how rare that is. Too many films suggest certainty where there was none. 12 Strong may not reinvent the genre, but it captures a moment of transition honestly, and sometimes accuracy matters more than originality. Number 6, The Outpost, 2020. This film didn't fail with critics. It was barely noticed at all. The Outpost arrived quietly and stayed that way in reviews. Limited release, minimal buzz. Critics largely overlooked it. Veterans did not. Many immediately recognized its portrayal of vulnerability, a location that never should have existed, a sense of being watched constantly. Based on real events, the film focuses on a remote position surrounded by high ground, where pressure builds daily. Veterans have praised how accurately the movie shows routine wearing people down, not fear in bursts, but fear as background noise. There are no dramatic speeches here, just repetition, preparation, fatigue. The film understands that danger doesn't always arrive as a surprise. Sometimes it announces itself slowly. Critics who did engage with the film often described it as overwhelming. Veterans described it as familiar. The confusion, the noise, the way coordination becomes difficult when everything happens at once. The Outpost doesn't frame events as heroic legend. It frames them as survival under conditions that never made sense. And that honesty earned it respect where hype did not. Number 5, Lone Survivor, 2013. This film was accused of being too intense. Veterans said it finally felt right. Critics were split on Lone Survivor. Some felt it leaned too hard into chaos, too relentless, too loud. Veterans had a different reaction, because chaos is the point. The film depicts a mission unraveling rapidly, with no clean lines and no controlled pace. Veterans frequently praise how accurately it captures how quickly situations collapse once something goes wrong. Plans vanish, orientation disappears, decisions become instinctual. The terrain itself becomes an obstacle that never stops pressing in. Movement is exhausting. Communication breaks down. Veterans have noted how rare it is to see physical strain treated with this much seriousness. Critics focused on messaging. Veterans focused on mechanics, how bodies move under stress, how people react when coordination fails, how survival becomes moment to moment. Lone Survivor doesn't slow down to explain itself. It drags the viewer through confusion, and for those who have lived through similar moments, that confusion felt honest. Number 4. Green Zone, 2010. This movie frustrated critics because it refused to be neat. Green Zone was criticized for feeling uncertain, for lacking a clear perspective, for questioning its own narrative. Veterans saw something familiar in that messiness, because uncertainty was the reality. The film centers on misinformation, shifting objectives, and the growing realization that clarity is often missing at every level. Veterans have often praised how accurately it portrays confusion on the ground when direction from above feels unreliable. Critics wanted answers. Veterans recognize the absence of them. Orders change, information contradicts itself. Trust erodes quietly. The film doesn't dramatize this process. It lets it unfold. Green Zone isn't about action. It's about disorientation, and that focus unsettled viewers expecting momentum. Veterans saw reflection instead. It's a film about realizing too late that the map you were given was never accurate, and that realization lands harder than any spectacle. Number 3. Black Hawk Down, 2001. This movie looks controlled, but it feels overwhelming by design. Black Hawk Down is often praised technically, but criticized for context. Veterans focus on something else entirely: sensory overload, the sound, the repetition, the feeling that events never slow down long enough to process. The film drops the viewer into a prolonged crisis with little explanation and no pause. Veterans frequently cite this as one of the most accurate portrayals of how time stretches and compresses under pressure. Critics debated perspective. Veterans recognized procedure, how communication fragments, how objectives blur, how exhaustion builds unnoticed until it suddenly matters. There is no single hero, just individuals trying to function inside a system under strain. That lack of spotlight is exactly why many veterans continue to defend the film. Black Hawk Down doesn't ask you to admire. It asks you to endure, and that distinction makes all the difference. Number 2. We Were Soldiers, 2002. Critics said it was old-fashioned. Veterans said it finally felt respectful. When We Were Soldiers premiered, many reviewers dismissed it as too traditional, too earnest, too focused on honor and leadership. In an era leaning toward cynicism, sincerity felt out of step. Veterans saw something else: care. This film spends time on preparation, on responsibility, on the weight leaders carry before anything even begins. Veterans have often pointed out how rare that is. Too many movies start with chaos. This one starts with duty. The story shows how leadership is not about speeches. It's about presence, about knowing names, about understanding that every decision affects families far beyond the field. Veterans frequently praise how the film balances action with consequence. Loss is not rushed. Silence is allowed. The film pauses when it needs to. Critics wanted sharper edges. Veterans recognized restraint. We Were Soldiers doesn't pretend experience is glamorous. It treats it as serious, personal, permanent. And that tone earned it long-term respect among those who value accuracy over irony. Sometimes the most realistic thing a movie can do is slow down and take people seriously. This one does. Number 1. Act of Valor, 2012. Critics laughed at the acting. Veterans stopped talking and watched. Act of Valor was nearly dismissed on arrival. Reviews focused on stiff delivery, on unconventional performances, on the absence of polish. Veterans focused on something far more important: authenticity. This film features real active duty service members portraying scenarios drawn from lived experience. That choice alone changed everything. Movements feel different. Communication sounds real. Silence carries weight. Veterans have consistently praised how the film captures operational rhythm. The way preparation looks unremarkable until it suddenly matters. The way teamwork replaces individual spotlight. Critics judged it as drama, veterans judged it as representation, and by that standard, Act of Valor succeeded where many technically superior films did not. There is no showmanship here, no exaggerated emotion, just professionalism. That restraint confused audiences expecting performance. Veterans recognized it immediately. Act of Valor is not a traditional movie. It's closer to a window, and that is exactly why it tops this list, because when it comes to realism, truth does not always sound rehearsed. So maybe the real question isn't which war movies are good, it's who gets to decide. Critics watch for structure, style, and polish. Veterans watch for recognition, for moments that feel familiar in ways they never asked to remember. These films may stumble on paper, but they land where it counts. Now, I want to hear from you. Which movie felt real to you, even when everyone else missed it? Drop it in the comments, share this list, and subscribe for more stories where experience speaks louder than reviews.